In the mid-19th century, the United States was a nation on the brink. A nation built on the principles of unity and freedom found itself divided, with tensions escalating between the northern and southern states. The roots of this discord ran deep, entwined in the very fabric of the country's political, economic, and social systems. At the heart of these divisions were issues of states' rights. The South, with its agrarian economy, heavily relied on slave labor. The North, on the other hand, was rapidly industrializing and held a different perspective on slavery. The debate over the rights of individual states to legislate their own affairs, particularly concerning slavery, was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Economic differences further fueled this discord. The northern states, with their burgeoning industries, favored high tariffs to protect their goods from foreign competition. Conversely, the southern states, whose economy was based on export crops, opposed these tariffs, viewing them as detrimental to their economic interests. But above all, it was the institution of slavery that was the major bone of contention. The South viewed it as an essential part of their way of life and economy, while the North increasingly saw it as a moral wrong. The tension between these conflicting views was brokered through several compromises. The Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 were attempts to maintain a fragile balance between the slave-holding South and the free North. However, these compromises were like sticking plasters on a deep wound, providing temporary relief, but failing to heal the underlying ailment. As the 1850s wore on, the nation's divisions deepened, and compromise seemed increasingly out of reach. Each event, each decision, was like another log thrown onto the fire, causing the flames of discord to burn higher and brighter. These events set the stage for a conflict that would define a nation, the American Civil War. A war that would test the very principles upon which the nation was built and forever change the course of American history. Central to the conflict was the issue of states' rights. The concept of states' rights is deeply rooted in the fabric of America's political landscape. This ideology, born out of the revolutionary spirit of our founding fathers, champions the notion that states hold powers independent of the federal government. In the years leading up to the Civil War, the issue of states' rights became a powder keg, ready to ignite the flames of conflict. The southern states, largely agrarian and economically dependent on slavery, felt that their rights were being trampled on by the northern-dominated federal government. The South argued for the protection of their economic interests, which were intrinsically tied to the institution of slavery. The northern states, rapidly industrializing and moving away from slavery, saw the southern demands as a threat to the unity of the nation. The North asserted that the federal government had the ultimate authority to decide on matters of national importance, such as the expansion of slavery into new territories. This ideological tug-of-war between states' rights and federal authority wasn't merely a political debate. It was a clash of cultures, economies, and ways of life. The South's insistence on states' rights was not purely about preserving their economic status quo, but also about defending their traditional lifestyle against perceived northern aggression. The North, on the other hand, saw the South's insistence on states' rights as a smokescreen to protect the institution of slavery. They argued that if every state had the right to decide on all matters independently, the nation would crumble into a collection of disconnected entities, each pulling in a different direction. This divergence in views created a rift that widened over time, with neither side willing to give ground. The stage was set for a showdown between the proponents of state sovereignty and those championing federal authority. The ideological battle lines were drawn, and the nation was on the brink of the most devastating conflict in its history. This ideological battle between state sovereignty and federal authority was a key factor in the lead-up to war. At the heart of the matter lay the contentious issue of slavery. So let's dive into the role it played in sparking the conflict we now know as the American Civil War. Slavery was more than a system of labor. It was an economic powerhouse, a social order, and a moral flashpoint. In the South, the economy was deeply tied to the institution of slavery. Large plantations producing cotton, tobacco, and other cash crops relied heavily on the labor of enslaved people. This economic reliance on slavery formed a significant part of the Southern identity, creating a deep-rooted societal structure that was hard to change. In contrast, the northern states, with their more diverse economies and less reliance on agriculture, had largely moved away from slavery. They saw it as an outdated and morally reprehensible practice. This vast difference in economic structures and societal norms created a rift between the North and South, a rift that only widened as the nation expanded westward. As new territories were added to the Union, the question arose, would these new states be free or slave states? This question stirred up heated debates and led to a series of compromises in an attempt to maintain a delicate balance of power between free and slave states. But each compromise only served to highlight the deepening divide over the issue of slavery. Beyond the economic and political implications, slavery was a moral issue that struck at the heart of what it meant to be American. The nation that proclaimed all men are created equal was grappling with the reality that it held millions in bondage. This moral contradiction stirred passionate debates, incited violence, and ultimately set the stage for a war that would decide the fate of the nation. The issue of slavery was not just a political dispute, it was a moral and human one, fueling the flames of war. And as we'll see in the next segment, the election of Abraham Lincoln would be the spark that finally ignited those flames. In 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln lit the fuse of war. It was a defining moment in American history, a moment that would set the course for years of conflict and reshape the nation. Abraham Lincoln, a lawyer and politician from Illinois, was a member of the newly formed Republican Party. He rose to prominence with a clear message: the containment of slavery. Lincoln did not advocate for the immediate abolition of slavery where it already existed, but he was firmly against its expansion into new territories. This stance set him apart in the political landscape and won him the presidency. However, this victory was not celebrated by all. In the southern states, where slavery was an integral part of the economy and society, Lincoln's election was seen as a direct threat. His stance on slavery, albeit moderate, was interpreted as an attack on the Southern way of life. The fear and anger that ensued among the Southern elite were profound. They believed that Lincoln's presidency would spell the end of their rights, their power, and their wealth. In response to Lincoln's election, 7 Southern states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, took a drastic step. They declared their secession from the Union, asserting their belief in states' rights over federal authority. This was an act of rebellion, a defiant stance against a government they felt no longer represented them. It was this act that marked the beginning of the American Civil War. The election of Abraham Lincoln was more than just a political event. It was a spark that ignited the powder keg of tension that had been building for years. It brought to the surface the deep-seated issues of states' rights and slavery, issues that had been simmering beneath the surface of American politics. And it set the stage for one of the most tumultuous periods in American history. The election of Lincoln was a catalyst, pushing the nation from tension into outright war. The Civil War was not just a war between North and South, but a war over the very soul of the nation. In 1861, the simmering tensions finally boiled over. The United States, a young nation, was on the brink of a disastrous internal conflict. The Southern states, feeling marginalized and threatened by the Northern policies and the election of Abraham Lincoln, made a drastic decision. They began to secede from the Union. This marked the formation of the Confederate States of America, a separate entity that sought to protect its perceived rights and way of life. South Carolina was the first to secede in December 1860, followed by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. These states were later joined by Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. These 11 states, collectively known as the Confederacy, were united by their shared commitment to states' rights and the institution of slavery. But the secession of these states was not taken lightly by the Union. It was a direct challenge to the authority of the federal government. The tension reached a boiling point at Fort Sumter, a Union stronghold in the heart of the Confederacy in South Carolina. The Confederate forces attacked the fort on April 12, 1861, marking the first military action of the Civil War. The attack on Fort Sumter was a wake-up call for the nation. It signaled the start of a brutal and bloody war that would last for 4 long years. It was a war that would test the resolve of the Union and the mettle of the Confederacy. It was a war that would redefine the United States and its ideals. The Civil War was not just a battle between the North and the South. It was a clash of ideologies, a struggle for power, and a fight for the soul of the nation. It was a war that would shape the future of the United States and leave an indelible mark on its history. The stage was set, the lines were drawn, and the United States was plunged into a bloody civil war. The consequences of this conflict would reverberate throughout the centuries, shaping the nation we know today.